5 basic needs. 5 basic needs. So you got to be careful about needs. Look at your neighbor and say, you got to be careful about those needs. See, a need is a psychological or a physiological feature that arouses and causes you to behave in a particular way. And that feature arouses you to the point where you must bring satisfaction to the need. So you got to be careful about needs. And so this woman had many of them. So Abraham Maslow says that there are 5 basic needs. He says that everybody has a physiological need. That means we have a need for food, water, and sex. And we have a need for sleep every day. Those are physiological needs. And then he says that we have some safety and security needs. That's why we need to make sure our homes, we put alarm systems on our home because we want to feel safe. We buy life insurance because we want something to be left over. And so we have all kinds. Some of us buy weapons and put them in our houses just so that we can have a sense of safety. And then he says every human being needs love and needs to be able to belong. And that's why we have friendships. And we hold dear to them, and we have relationships that we cling on to. We have cliques that we're a part of. That's why the world has gangs, because they want a sense of longing and belonging. And then every person needs esteem, because we need to feel good about ourselves. We need to have confidence about ourselves. And then the last one, he says every human being has to have a sense of self-actualization. That means how I feel about my accomplishments, how I feel about my life. What have I done all my life? Here I am, 40, 50 years old, and I want you to know I ain't done nothing with my life. And then there are others that are very successful in their life, and they look back and they feel real pleased. But this woman, on the other hand, even though she had many needs, her life is beginning to change. This woman had some strikes against her. Number one, because of her gender. Look at your neighbor and say it was because she was a female. In our society, you will find, well, during this particular time, Jews were not supposed to be speaking to women out in the public, let alone their own wives. They were not to have any type of conversation with females out in the public. And here is Jesus out talking to this Samaritan woman. And the research says that it was just him and her. But when you look at the detail of the text, you will find out that it had to be somebody else there, because we have a lot of detail in this text. It had to be somebody else there with Jesus and the Samaritan woman who was witnessing the fact that he was talking to her. And most theologians say that it had to be the beloved John who was there. He was there taking notes and taking those notes and placing them in his mind. He was the beloved. He had to be near Jesus while the disciples were going off to find food and to find nourishment. And so here we find that because of her gender, she was ostracized. Not only that, she had a problem with men. She had been married 5 times, and the one that she is with was not hers, which means she'll steal your man. And so the women in the community had a problem with her. Oh, watch out, watch out. They didn't want her around. Don't come to my house for dinner. I'm not inviting you because you might steal my husband. I'm not asking you to come to the sister girls club because you might figure out a way to get my sister's husband. So she was ostracized, and she's going to the well at 12 noon in the afternoon, which also is unheard of. Why in the world do you want to go to the well at 12 o'clock? It's too hot out here. It's too hot to be coming out here to draw somebody some water, and then let alone you want to get out there and a man is sitting there at the well talking about give me a drink. So this particular woman, she was ostracized, and people hated her. They didn't like her. They didn't want her anywhere near. And I don't blame them. I don't think I'd invite you to my house either if I know that you have a reputation of stealing husbands. If I know that you have a bad attitude and that you're full of prejudice and discrimination and that you have accepted what the enemy has put on your life. And so here, this particular woman, she's going through a lot, and she has definitely some needs. She has some physiological needs, and she definitely has some safety, love, and belonging needs. She has some esteem and some self-actualization needs. Oh, she's got a whole bunch of them. But the good happenings of this woman, of her life, is that she met the Christ. Thank God for Jesus. Have you ever been characterized with a real bad attitude, with a real bad reputation, and it wasn't until you met the Christ that stench and that bad title was lifted over a period of time? I want you to know that God, he is getting ready to do a new thing in her. So her reputation is further etched because of where she is from. Not only because she was stealing folks' husbands, and she had been married 5 times. Not only because she was a female, but because also she was from Samaria. So where did the hostility begin? The hostility began when the Assyrians took Samaria into captivity. And when they took them into captivity, they deported a large number of the Jews out. And they replaced them with a whole bunch of Assyrians. And they went in there as foreigners, and they began to hook up with the Jews. Got over there and hooked up, started liking each other, started winking their eye at each other, got together, and they began to intermarry one another, and they had children. And this teed the Jews off because they came over there with their own way of worshiping and serving God. The place to worship was Jerusalem, but no, they decided that they were going to build Mount Gerizim, and they were going to begin to worship. And so this caused a lot of conflict as to the Jews and the Samaritans. And because of these poor relations, the Jews avoided traveling through Samaria. Now they have to come from where they are straight to Jerusalem, straight road, straight shot. But instead they decide to go around Jerusalem to get to their place of worship. Isn't that a shame? And so we have all kinds of tension between the Samaritans and the Jews. Now the Jews consider them outcasts, and they consider them untouchable, and they're racially inferior, and they also practice a false religion. The Jews despise these people, and they hated them even more than they hated the Gentiles, because they were a group of Jews who believed that they should serve their God. So not only were there strict rules about Jews and Samaritans talking, there were also rules about men and women conversing. And so any close physical contact with a Samaritan, like drinking water at a well from a common bucket, is unheard of. Eating a meal together and coming together in ceremony, no way, it's not happening. So this meant that they were unable, if they came in contact with a Samaritan, the Jews were unable to go into the temple to worship. They could not go because they were ceremonially unclean. And so all of this because of discrimination and prejudice. The Jews believed that Jerusalem was the only place to worship God. But I love God, how he begins to break those barriers that many times we find ourselves upholding and still erecting to this particular day. But I want you to know that this particular woman, if she only knew who, and if she only knew what, if she only knew how. In verse 10 we find out that he responds to her, he says, if you only knew